In this video, I want to reflect a little bit about the self in IFS. And I want to reflect about the way self-energy, these concepts are used in IFS, and also the place the self has in both the IFS theory and the IFS process. IFS uses two terms when it's referring to the self, and it's using these two terms kind of interchangeably. It's the term self and self-energy. Usually the terms are used in a form of being in self or being in self-energy. And even though they're defined differently, the self being meaning the experience of being an individual, being a true individual, which in more spiritual terms could maybe be referred to as the I am experience, whereas the experience of self-energy is defined as a way of relating to something. I am in self-energy, or I have enough self-energy when I relate to things in this form of the 8 C's. So I'm curious, calm, all of that. At the same time, the term self is often defined as being an individual that then experiences or has these qualities of the 8 C's. So the terms are kind of used interchangeably. But the thing that I think is most important to realize about the IFS process, and this makes perfect sense when looking at IFS as a therapy, is that the self is used kind of like a resource or a tool. Let me explain what I mean by that. If we look at this process, and this is again my map, but in this process, the self and self-energy, and I here would refer to it as self-energy, is used as a resource for the tool to work. We can only get to these places of befriending and then especially the exile work if enough self-energy is present. That means in the form of the therapy, the self can be viewed as a necessary resource. That means if enough self-energy is present, this can happen. If we do not have enough self-energy present, we won't get beyond a certain part of this process and of the healing process as IFS views it. So that's what I mean by it being viewed as a resource or a tool, because both are, a tool and a resource are defined as something we use for something. So in the IFS therapeutic process, the self is the tool, it's the agent of healing. This perspective of the self or the self-energy as a tool for the therapeutic process is actually perfectly fine, and it's even more developed than most therapies that don't really have a perspective on the self, on the essence of a person playing any role in therapy. So I think it's brilliant that it's in IFS, and I think it's incredible that this perspective is taken, because especially if you keep in mind how the self was discovered in IFS, and also knowing the background that it was developed while working with severely traumatized people, then you see that the self is like a gift to the therapeutic world. And I think viewing the self as a tool, as a resource, kind of looking at the self and the self-energy as long as we have enough self-energy, we can go through the healing process, is incredibly useful, incredibly pragmatic, and in my perspective, for many people who come to IFS therapy for healing with their wounds, it's a perfect position to take. As long as there is enough self there, we can move forward, and that is a pragmatic position in therapy that I think can get you very, very far. At the same time, this pragmatic approach of looking at the self as a tool has its downfalls, because I think as long as we look at the self as, oh, we have enough self-energy here, everything's okay, we can move forward with the process, we are missing the actual beauty and subtlety of the self. And I think that's where people who are looking more for growth, who are looking at IFS more as an opportunity to explore themselves, bring more of their true nature into the world, and grow beyond what might be ordinarily thought possible for humans, that approach of viewing the self merely as a resource or as this, we have enough of it, is not sufficient, and I actually think can hinder growth in certain dimensions where it's more about bringing essential states and states of presence into our life. I think we need a slightly different map, and I want to propose such a map, and I want to at the same time really emphasize that all the tools IFS is using can be integrated in this map. I think the major shift in thinking I want to propose in this video is using the self as the tool for parts work. So the self is the resource we need to do the parts work, to do the therapeutic work. That's kind of the classical IFS perspective, if it's a little bit simplified, and shifting that into a perspective where the parts work, so what we know about how we can be with parts, how we can interact with them, unblend from them, learn about their intentions, all of those steps, the parts work is the tool, is the resource to explore and unfold more of our true self. And in this next video I want to explore a little bit of what a map could be that supports that kind of exploration, that kind of unfolding.
You never know what's around.